Is it all good? All right, thanks. So you want me to start? Go ahead. All righty. Well, welcome you guys, and welcome to everybody out there in TV land. I'm Steve Horton with the Ohio School Boards Association, and I am very pleased to be here tonight, be able to talk to you about one of my favorite subjects, which is strategic planning, and to give you some insight into kind of rationale for it, process, the things that we see that are successful, most successful with school districts that go down the route of strategic planning. And there are some school districts that do it extremely well, and some that are extremely successful implementing their plans and moving forward. We've seen great benefit from it. So those things I want to get into. And I'll say it to all of you and anybody out there who's watching this through technology. I love the fact that with technology we can stream this to multiple ESCs and allow more people to be able to have access. But if any questions come up, please ask them. I love questions. I love discussion, even more so than hearing my own voice. So if I bring up anything that arises a question, please don't hesitate out there or in here to bring those up. So let's talk a little bit about strategic planning. I think I've got a lot to say here in the next 5 hours. So we'll just start out by saying that we're not really going to be here 5 hours. But I did want to share a couple of quotes that I love that I think speak to two parts of strategic planning that I'm going to get into in more detail tonight. And that is the first one from Ben Franklin's grandmother, look before or you will find yourself behind. I love that quote, and it is true. The strategic planning, the whole purpose is to allow you to look ahead, to put you into a mode of looking forward and thinking about what's coming, planning for what's coming, making the best possible plans. But for a strategic plan to be most successful, and I say this loud and clear to any board members when I talk to them about strategic planning, that you got to focus on the end results. Yes, it is about the plan that you put in place. It's about looking into the future and being forward thinking, and it's about really thinking about what does success look like? What is that end result going to look like for you and your district? And I think that has to be thinking when you go into the whole process of doing strategic planning. So I'm going to touch on that a lot more as we go here, especially those 2 points. So let's talk a little bit about the board and strategic planning. I think there are some things to keep in mind. And anytime I would talk to somebody about strategic planning, I would say that when I say it starts at the top, that is perhaps the most important part of it. Strategic plan, if it's going to be successful, has to be embraced from the top down, meaning the board, everybody on that board has to embrace the idea of going into the process, of accepting the product that comes out and moving forward with it. The board needs to hold that vision and mission. We talk a lot about the traits of the effective districts and school boards. There's 8 of them. And the very first trait, this comes out of research, holds true to a vision and a mission, and that the board knows what that is, and they make it their work to make sure that everybody's accountable to that. And that really starts, I think, with a very strong strategic plan. The most successful districts have a strategic plan that's in place and it's working. It's not a simple thing, but it is a very important thing. It is a way to stay on message. When I say it's a simple way to stay on message, it is much easier to put the strategic plan out there and the goals associated with that plan and make it very clear to your community and all of your stakeholders, this is where we're going. When you have that to put out in front of people, then it shows direction. It shows, you know what, we're thinking about this. I chuckle, last week I was involved with a new board member academy, and we had a room full of brand new board members. And one of the people, since I was up in the Northeast, who was there speaking, is our Northeast region manager. And he by trade is a firefighter. And I mentioned to board, I said, Reno does firefighting as his vocation. It's what he loves doing. But as a board member, not so much. You don't really want to be a firefighter, right? I mean, we've been there. I can think back to when I was a board member, especially as a new board member, there were a couple things missing for me when I came on board. And I was troubled by the fact that I never really got a good answer. One was, what is the plan? I asked that because I came out of a life prior to coming to OSBA where strategic planning was an important part of what we did. And I was not unfamiliar with that. But I didn't know what the plan was. And when I said, what are the goals? Where are we going? I didn't really get an answer. And I felt like at the very outset, when we're talking about making deep cuts in budget at the time, we were heading into fiscal caution, and we were having to RIF teachers, and it really was all, we were running around with fire extinguishers, putting out fires. I thought it made the job a lot harder than it really should have been. So a big thing about strategic plan is it keeps you out of firefighting mode. So you don't have to do that kind of work. And it allows everybody then to stay on message about the vision. We all need to be on the same page, right? Go ahead.
Take that year or 5 years down the road, or how many years you get down the road in your strategic plan?
When we talk about strategic plans, we always talk about them in terms of 3 to 5 years.
5 years.
Yeah, I mean, and in fact, a district that hasn't done the work of planning, even if it's going back and revisiting and kind of retooling and rethinking, within that 5-year time, it really is time to do that. A lot of things change in that amount of time. Hopefully, you've been progressing, and hopefully you're getting to a place where, yeah, we want to re-examine, do these goals make sense? Are we still heading in the right direction? So yeah, that'd be the answer there. But the other thing that it also really helps with, and I'll talk a lot more about this as I get more into the meat of this, that administrators really need to have a sense of direction, goals, objectives. One of the things that kind of got me into what I'm doing now, well, not kind of, it had a lot to do with it. It had a lot to do with me becoming a board member in the first place. I started out as a school teacher. My father was a superintendent for 22 years in 3 different parts of the state. So he started up in the Toledo area, went over to the eastern part of the area, east of here in Jefferson County. That's where I spent my childhood. And then we moved down to Cincinnati, where I graduated from high school. But in those 22 years, one of the things that he's talked about is he would always love, to have very clear goals and objectives from his boards. Didn't always get that. And his job was much more difficult when he didn't have that, because the work has to go on. And then you're questioning, am I doing the right work? Am I doing things that the board is going to agree with and going to back me up on? That's a big thing. Your administrators, especially your superintendent treasurer, they have to know that they're doing work that you're behind and that you're backing them up on. That is so important. So with that, if they have those goals and objectives in place, they can be more effective. And the strategic plan is really the best way to accomplish that end. So those things are all very important. Some other things to think about that I'm also going to talk more about as we get into this. It does make evaluation easier and more objective. If you have something to evaluate on, you can be much more objective about it with your superintendent and treasurer. They likewise can do a better job with their people, their administrators, and on down the line. It lines everything up. It helps you track progress in what's happening. As we talk about not micromanaging, the fact is micromanaging for board members really doesn't help you have a better idea of what's going on in your district. You might think it does, but it doesn't. But if you have a strategic plan in place that you are looking at very critically, and that your people are diligently working on, it allows you to have a much better sense of what's happening and what direction you're going in. It allows you to assess in a much better way, are we being successful? Are we doing the stuff that we said we wanted to do or was going to be most important for our future? And then it helps you, I'll go back to the firefighter thing, it just helps you keep track of priorities. What's most important? Where do we need to be allocating, spending resources, time, money, facilities? And those are all critical decisions for every district. The strategic plan sets you up to be successful in those decisions. So what I like to think about, and this is the answer, John, to your question about the length of time, I like to think of the strategic plan as the umbrella for the district. So what do I mean about umbrella? Well, oftentimes when we talk to districts about strategic planning, there's a little bit of a rub. There's I'm not sure how to get into this, because it's likely that you have a district leadership team, of teachers and administrators that are already doing planning and working. A lot of districts have building leadership teams as well that work under those. I've been involved with districts that have boards who are working, a district leadership team who's working on initiatives, building leadership teams who are working on different initiatives, and all of this is going on simultaneously. And where I really see a disconnect and where you can kind of feel that is there is nothing tying all that work together. So invariably when we start talking about strategic planning with districts, we get this question of, well, what about? What about the work we're already doing? Look, we've got these goals from the leadership teams. This is what they're working on. These are the things the board has said are priorities when we've met and talked about it. How does all that work with the strategic plan? And my answer is you need a strategic plan, because ideally it's going to take all of those things, pull them together, and put them under one comprehensive umbrella. So instead of saying, well, okay, this year this is what we're going to really focus on, you're looking at it farther down the road. You're 3 to 5 years down the road. So you've already put in things in place. This is where we want to get to. This is that end result. Think back to that first quote that I talked about from Winston Churchill. You need to focus on the end results. So if we're focused on the end result, then what happens up to that are the things that we say we need to be doing to get there. We need to take these steps and do these things. And we're doing that, and we can measure, and we can see that we're getting closer to that end result. But in most cases, we don't ever define that in any real way. So that's one of the big things. So, think umbrella. Everything else you do in a district falls under that. Ultimately, to the point where I really believe this is true, and I've seen it in action as we are around the state working with many, many boards and different school districts, we regularly have instances where we see districts doing this work and very successfully, and what is happening is it's pulling all of the work together. It's making it much easier for them to make decisions ultimately down the road. I mean, that should be the purpose. And what I love is I still remember, I think it was probably about 4 years ago now, I met with a board in a one-on-one session. They had new board members, so it was right after an election. And it really was about them working on building a new team. And one of the new board members raised his hand, he looked at me and he smiled and he said, "Have you been online and looked at our strategic plan?" And all of the other board members are nodding, going and said, yeah, and in fact it was a very impressive strategic plan, I thought. It had all the elements I'm going to talk about tonight that I think should be in there. And I just remember, and I still remember to this day, the look of pride on his face as a brand new board member of saying, this is our strategic plan. They own that plan. And if they own that plan, it's going to be successful. If they don't own it, not much chance of success. Very little chance. I think that's 100% true. I don't like to make big, broad 100% statements, but I think that's one of them that falls in that category. The board has to be behind it. So it's the umbrella that encompasses the board and everybody else. I also equate strategic planning with texting and driving. I think this analogy works on a lot of levels. If you think about it, I've been guilty of doing it. Something comes up, I just have to look at it. I'm no longer focusing on what's ahead of me, but I'm focused on what's in front of me. And that caused me to think about the work I do and the amount of driving I do. Last night, I was up in Mahoning County in Springfield, almost in Pennsylvania. The night before that, I was in Ashland. I'm here tonight. We're in that time of the year where we do a lot of that driving and that traveling. And what I found works best, and I wasn't even thinking about the fact that I do this, because of some nightmarish trips where one, I didn't really have the trip defined, not sure where I'm going, and now, I screw something up and I'm struggling to figure out, okay, first of all, where am I going? I can't tell you how many times I've pulled up to a building or a structure where I was supposed to go, and then I'm thinking, what door am I supposed to go into? Where should I park? And I'm driving around going, I don't know. And I've actually gotten out, walked up the building, said, oh, this is locked. Walked to the next door, this is locked. It's like, okay, what am I supposed to do? And then I have also found myself on the phone, and I'm doing this while I'm driving, looking for an email because the person I've been talking to sent me an email and there's a phone number and I got to call somebody. So what I have figured out really works best is before I leave, I did this tonight, I go to my GPS, I look up the location I'm going to, I look at the route. Where am I traveling? Okay, now I got a really good sense of where I'm headed. I look at how long it's going to take, when do I need to leave. I have the numbers of the contacts. Chris's phone number's in my pocket in case I need it. Just the little things like that. I know now to ask, when I get to your building, where should I park and where should I go in? Seems like a little thing, but if I know all that ahead, I can be a whole lot more effective. I can come in better equipped to do a better job. And I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking that's strategic planning on kind of a micro level, but if you think that out into a strategic plan for a whole district, that's kind of the idea. I'm not worried about doing these little things. I'm not taking my focus off of what I need to be looking at, which is down the road. Because eventually, I'm going to have an issue if I'm not really paying attention to what's in front of me. So, I always say that, I believe this. Districts that are going to their communities and saying all of a sudden, guys, not looking good. Next year or the year after that, we're going to be in the red. We're going to have to make cuts. It's a pretty jarring thing for the community. It's a jarring thing for the staff. They're hearing this from the leadership that, oh my goodness. You ever watch the show The Office? One of the things that cracked me up about that show was the running theme, we're downsizing. They're going to downsize. Well, now you got staff thinking, okay, who's going to get riffed? What are they going to do? And I've always said that if you're really looking into the future and you're planning ahead, those kind of things don't just happen. Now, there are unexpected events that certainly can happen. But for the most part, you can see those things coming in advance. You can give yourself time to alert your stakeholders of something down the road that could be problematic or a red flag. Those kind of things don't have to be, oh my goodness, what are we going to do now? And that's indicative of you're buried in your agendas, you're buried in what you're doing month to month, you're not thinking down the road or what's ahead. So one of the things that forces you to look ahead is if you're really focused on that plan that you created. So I love that analogy. I'm going to stick with it. It is a good idea to keep your eyes on the road. So let's talk about some basic elements of a good strategic plan. If it's something you're thinking about doing with your board and your district, I hope you are, here are some things to keep in mind. One, it needs to be more than the board. I have spent time doing goal setting with boards on many occasions, and invariably, somebody will ask, what about the rest of the community? What about the staff? Are they going to buy into these goals we're setting? And honestly, the answer in that scenario is, I don't know. We're not asking them. So I think, first and foremost, you need to get participation from stakeholders. And I'm going to get more into that team and what that looks like as we go here. You got to have diversity of opinions and perspectives. You need to invite the people who aren't necessarily real thrilled with the things you're doing. Get them in the room, have them talk, and I'll talk a little bit more about strategy on that because that's sometimes hard to do. There are those people out there I bet you can think of, I don't really want to invite them in. But I argue those are people you need to get in there. Those are people who need to be part of the conversation overall. Facilitation that ensures inclusive culture and an efficient focus on time. Nobody wants to waste time. You will anger people if you involve them in a process that has them walking away going, I don't know what we accomplished. I don't know that we are any better off now than when we started this whole thing. And people just feel like, well, I've invested time and I got nothing to show for it. So that's an road you don't want to go to. I'm going to talk about strategies for making sure that doesn't happen. And then it should be a plan that's measurable. There should be a clear vision. There should be a mission. There need to be very clear, broad, but specific goals. And it needs to set up the process of let's examine these goals and let's figure out how we're going to get there, step by step. It puts all of that in motion for the whole district. So now instead of saying, okay, well, at North Elementary we've got this building leadership team, and at South Elementary we got another building leadership team. The two haven't met in the middle, they're doing their own thing. And I hear complaints all the time, especially from parents. What one school does isn't even close to what another school's doing in the same district. Well, now you've got a means to pull them all together and to streamline that work. So let's talk a little bit about what it should do. It should ultimately, to that conversation about trying to pull everybody together and pull all your resources together, it should talk about how you're going to acquire and allocate the resources that you have. I'm talking about facilities, human resources, financial, community. All of those are important elements of the work that you do every day. So it does help pull those together. Hopefully it's building on current successes. So we're not just talking about, hey, looking where we have issues and what are our priorities be, but let's look at where we are successful and let's see if we can't be more successful as well. Guide decision making from the top down. Board should be able to look at the strategic plan and look at the decision that's about to be made and very clearly ask, are we supporting the strategic plan? I love it when districts look at it. In fact, I heard it very recently. Board was really wrestling with the decision. They were going to go into strategic planning. They already had it planned for the next month. And one of the board members there said, I don't think we should even really be talking about this until we go through the strategic planning and we have a plan in place. And I went, yay, that's awesome. Awesome that you're thinking, look, we are wasting our time, we're spinning our wheels if we're not supporting the plan that we put in place. I think that's a very intelligent statement to make. It's your roadmap. It's that GPS. You're looking at it, I know where I'm going. I feel secure that I'm going to get from point A to point B because I'm looking at the map. Now go back to texting and driving. If you're looking down the road, you can travel much more securely and a lot less stressfully than if you're not looking at the road but you're still speeding down the highway. So force yourself to look down the road and to really make use of that roadmap for future success. So those are some elements that I want you to think about as we talk about really what goes into strategic planning, because I do want to get into process. One of the things that's very important in any strategic planning is that there is a very, very distinct process to the plan. There has to be, because otherwise you will come out of it wondering, did we really accomplish anything? You'll have more confusion than you will actually providing clarity, the clarity that a strategic plan should provide. So the process is critical, but on the other hand, it's got to be balanced with you're willing to go with what comes out of the planning process. So it can't be so rigid that you're actually controlling thought or ideas or direction, but there has to be a purpose for it all. So let's talk a little bit more about that. That is the part, more than anything, that helps board members stay in their lanes. Boards and districts that struggle with the old micromanaging word or being in the proverbial weeds, more times than not, it's because board members don't feel like they really have a handle on what's happening in the district. And so people tend to take matters into their own hands. If I don't feel like I got a good grasp on this, then I'm going to dive in and try to figure it out. And that's what we want to avoid happening. That's why I'm all the time in front of boards of education saying, don't do that. That doesn't help. Okay, let's talk about that a little bit. I think most importantly to any process for strategic planning is you've got to have a diverse team working on it. Whatever you call that team, it's got to be a consistent group that is there for the long haul to see it through. it's really important, again, that you consider everything. Consider the people, well, and I've heard this from districts that, well, we've got this neighborhood or this pocket of families, and we have trouble reaching them. If we do surveys, they're the ones who don't answer. If we do community forums or that kind of thing, they're the ones who are never there to show up, and yet we know we have issues. If you can get into that community or communities, bring them into the process, please do. Get those people in the room. And like I say, be bold enough to get the people in the room that you know aren't very complimentary. We struggle with that a lot as I talk to districts about strategic planning. There might be a particular person that we definitely don't want there. What if that person wants to be involved? I've heard that. What if he wants to come in and be involved in the process? And my answer is, what are you afraid of? Are you afraid that he might say things that aren't things you want to hear? Maybe they're things you need to hear. So you got to be open to that possibility that you are going to hear things that are not necessarily what you want to hear. You want, I love this statement because it goes to introverts, extroverts, liberals, conservatives, get them all around the table, get them all in the room. So the amazing thing is, every time I've been involved in strategic planning, there has always been a concern about people being disruptive, sabotaging, making it difficult for the entire team to work. And I can say this very confidently that in every time I've been involved or other people that I've known of have been involved in strategic planning, that hasn't happened. When you get people into a common, safe environment and you set the stage for dialogue, dialogue happens. It's a good thing. So that's something that I hope boards and districts aren't afraid of as you go into the process. Get them in the room. So the process itself, it's got to take time. Cannot be done quickly. I wasn't involved with it, but prior to me coming on board with OSBA, two colleagues that I work with were involved with a large district who did the entire strategic planning process with them in a period of 5 days. They met every night. The consultants that were involved literally stayed in a hotel. So each night after the meetings, they were doing the things in preparation for the next meeting. And they got it done. And one of the lead consultants I talked to about that said, I will never do that again, ever. It was stressful. We tried to cram everything into such a short period of time that nobody really had a chance to digest what was being said or offered up, or how that plan was really turning out. And so I come into this with the firm belief that it needs to take time. I say allocate 6 months for the whole process. I think that's really important. And that doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to take that long, but you need to allow for the fact that it could very well take half a year to really get through it and to feel like you have a great product on the other end of it. Make it inclusive. We've already talked about that. It's got to be a safe environment. People who come into the process have to realize, I can say what I think I need to say. I can share, and they need to be willing to share with other people. One of the things I always stress, and I think is crucial, and I've seen this kind of trampled on in strategic planning actually, is if you say something or have an opinion and somebody else doesn't think that's right, or they have an opposite view, a different view, it's not right or wrong. There isn't a right or wrong. It's two different opinions, two different ideas. So you got to be willing to hear all the different ideas. Sometimes it gets really messy, but you have to be willing to hear that. And sometimes it comes down to, you might feel really strongly about this word or these couple words in this, but the rest of the group is not going in that direction. So you have to be able to give, and you have to be able to get in the same process. That make sense? So getting things done with the ability to speak and be heard, that's where the process part of it is so important. because once you get people talking, there will be lots of ideas thrown out, and it's very possible that what comes out of that discussion ends up being very diverse. So you have to find a way to pull that together and create very cohesive thoughts and statements. So sometimes that gets incredibly challenging, and sometimes it comes down to, we're moving on. This is the statement, we're moving on. Because if you don't, you can spend your 6 months working on one statement, and you don't want to let that happen. Current data has to be in there. Everybody in the room, especially if you've got a diverse group of stakeholders in the room working on the strategic plan, they all have to have a very clear picture of where your district is. Where is it strong? Where is it not strong? Where are the concerns, issues? All of those things need to be heard so that the group can formulate a very clear image of the district. But along with that, when I talk about data to inform, I love the idea of doing a perception type survey. Not one that's going to get down to the nitty gritty. Those things are important when you're talking about the plan. But I want to find out what the perception of the community is and the staff. What are the things that they think they know are? Some of them are pretty accurate, some of them maybe not. But that perception's huge, because in the end, perception is going to win out. It's going to be reality. So you have to take that into account as you're going through this. Critical issues need to drive the priorities so that everybody involved can look at what they know about the district, think about what are the biggest things we have. We call them big rocks a lot of times. You know, what are those rocks that are in the road that are keeping us from moving forward? We got to recognize them, identify them, and then we can attack how we're going to get them out of the way. But unless you recognize them, you're going to have trouble moving forward. So those things are important. The issues, critical issues, you have to get into those. Sometimes those can be difficult. I've heard some pretty tough discussions come out of that critical issue discussion, because it might be something you as a board member don't want to hear. That could very well be the case. But you have to consider this is an issue for somebody, and we have to be open to hearing it. So that's important. But ultimately, when you come out of it, if you're going to focus on the end result, you better have some very clear goals set, and you better have some objectives in place that are doable. I'll talk a little bit more about those here in just a minute. Okay? So that kind of sets up the process. I wanted to go a little bit deeper into what that means. Every strategic plan needs to be broken down into pieces. This is a model that I like that starts with big vision and mission on the top, and then it works down to goals and what you're going to do about those goal areas, and then how you're going to get to those goals underneath that. So you can see this keep fanning out, because what happens underneath these objectives need to be actual specific action steps. If the objective is we're going to build a new website for the district, okay, what are the steps you're going to take to make that happen? That's a pretty big project, and it's one worth doing, but you better figure out who's going to work on it, what is the timeline for that work, and then each step that needs to go into actually making that a successful objective. So it keeps fanning out as you go. The other way I like to think about strategic planning, and we'll see if you guys know what this picture is. What the heck is that? I know you've seen them before.
The coin thing from the mall.
It's a coin thing, yeah. Hyperbolic funnel is the way they refer to it. See them in museums and things. You drop a quarter or whatever coin in there. It starts at the top, and it starts spinning, and it keeps going, and it keeps going, and then it spins down through the hole into the bottom. They're fun to watch, but that's the way I think about the process. I think it's most successful if you drop that coin in, you let it spin, and it picks up momentum as it goes. So you start big. Start with the big ideas, the big vision first. And then, when you do that, keep purposely zeroing in, drilling in, to that final product. So I like that analogy. In my mind, it works for me. I think it helps people visualize where you're going from beginning to end with this whole 6-month or more project that you're embarking on. And then the other thing with the groups, how do you invite diverse groups to come together and really come out with strong stuff, usable ideas that you can pull into a strategic plan? The key is small groups. There needs to be a lot of opportunity for people to get together, not with their best friends, but get together in diverse groups within that team. So I always submit that your team working on this needs to be 25 or more people. I've worked with teams as many as 70. That was the biggest one. That was a little unwieldy. I don't suggest that. But somewhere in that 30, 35 people is a pretty good target. It's a workable group, but it allows you to do a lot of this work. The best fruit comes from small group conversations. This is also community engagement. If you really want to connect and engage, get your people out in the district into smaller groups, around in a circle, very much like you see these gentlemen, sitting around with a specific something to talk about. We're not just going to chat, but here is our goal. This is what we're talking about, and then let them get together and share dialogue. It's amazing. You can put people from opposite ends of the spectrum in this kind of setting, and the work that comes out of it is amazing. It really is fruitful. And you can spin your wheels for days with a big group, but once you break them down into small groups, all of a sudden things start happening. Thoughts come out, things really start to congeal. And then the other important part of that small group as part of the process, what they create has to be recorded, and then it has to come back to the large group. What did you come up with? What was your thought process that went into it for the entire group to be able to digest? And like I said, then the fun work starts, because then you're looking at, okay, group 1 had this, group 2 had this, group 3 had this, but in every one of those scenarios, it's pretty amazing the common themes that you see come out of that. And you can pull threads together from that to create one cohesive statement that really allows the most important things that came out of each one of those small groups to be threaded into the big stuff, the big work. And that's consensus. That's why I always tell boards, you're struggling with something, don't try to find a solution off the bat. Take time, talk, and understand what's most important to each person. What's that most valuable thing you can't do without, that's intrinsically part of you? That needs to be on the table. Needs to be part of that final equation. Well, that's what we're working toward here. With any strategic planning process, it needs to work toward finding out what's most important to everybody and pulling that into the final product so everybody has a stake in it. Does that all equate or make sense? Any questions about that? And I think what I love about it is all we have to do is just give very clear direction. This is what I want you to work on. This is a question I want you to ask yourselves. This is what we want you to come out of the room with when you're meeting in a small group. And then let it go work. Let it happen. It's pretty magical what happens once they're in that scenario. So, the biggest part, we drop the quarter into that funnel and it starts spinning. The biggest thing that I think you need to start with is vision. What is that vision statement? So, some thoughts about that. It needs to be very big and aspirational in nature. And I also say that you want to develop a word picture of the desired state. Not where we are now. Where do we dream that we could be someday? And it's important to dream big with that statement. It needs to be a positive scenario. And it's one that evokes a sense of confidence and pride, ultimately. It's what you want people to think. When they look at your district, if they look at the vision statement, it should put an image in their mind about your district. I I think one of the things that's very, very important about vision that I really like to do, and I've come into districts, there are a lot of districts that have a vision statement in place, and sometimes that vision statement has served very well, and there's a question, do we really need to change it? But I always challenge a group to say, look at it, think about it. Let's really examine and talk about it. If you come out with the same statement, all right. But if it changes in some way, better. If you come up with an entirely new statement, it's probably because you need a new statement. You aren't where you were when that was first created. It needs to reflect you now and where you want to be. So I think it's important to have that conversation. And sometimes there is that butting of heads. Why are we even talking about this? We've had this statement for 10 years. Because you really need to look at and examine it and think about it. Some of my favorites. I love this one. Everybody knows what Harley-Davidson is. But what I love about this statement and what we always tell people is your vision statement does not have to have your district's name in it. And in fact, you could argue the vision statement is attached to your district's strategic plan, so it's very clear who we're talking about here. But I think it should definitely put that image in somebody's mind, and that's why I love this one so much, that American by birth. Anybody can say made in America. Yeah. American by birth, that's really cool. That is just a neat statement. And what is the other part that they're talking about here? That rebel by choice. Has nothing to do with building motorcycles, right? Has nothing to do with selling motorcycles. What are they conjuring? What are they saying in that statement? There's a very clear image that they're putting in your mind. It's, we're bucking the system. We are not your average motorcycle. People who ride our motorcycles are not your average Joe on a motorcycle going down the street. That is what they want you to think when you see them touch their product. I think it's a brilliant vision statement because it definitely conjures an image. It conjures a lifestyle about the product. Some other ideas. The GE Imagination at Work. Innovation. We're dreaming stuff up. We're doing things you never thought of and bringing it to life. I think that's really cool. That's why I love this one. They used to use this vision statement. I think this went away. It's like 2003 or something. But we bring good things to life. I just love the animated nature of that. What wasn't there is now brought to life because of us and the things we do. So I think it's just a great way to say that. IKEA, what do you think of when you think of IKEA? Okay, uncomfortable couches. That's what but what I think of is exactly what their vision statement says, and that is affordable solutions. I know when we think about furniture, right, big ticket item. I rode a sofa once literally into like a pile heap on the floor until I finally thought, I got to replace this thing, darn it, because it's a big expense. So IKEA is coming at you, and the very first thing they're saying is, we're affordable. We have solutions you can buy. Huge. You want people to come into your store and look at your stuff? That's a great way to do it. So they're painting an image. But all of these vision statements have nothing to do with what you actually do. They have everything to do with what they want you to think when they look at your name and your logo. And I'd say it's no different for school districts. We're up against a pretty competitive environment, right? Does a day go by that you don't read something about charter schools or hear something or read an article about Nancy DeVos and school choice? And all of that is competition. It's competition for what you bring to the table for your students. And I think you have to think of it that way. So the vision statement hopefully is something that allows people to look at your school logo and to look at your vision statement and immediately conjure a very clear image of what your schools offer. So, and the other thing I like to say about creating a vision statement, I think it's really important to find out from the group that's working, what do you think about your district and your community? I mean, what if you're going to think about your district in the grandest, most productive, big way you could think of, the thing that brings the most pride to you about where you live or where you go to school, what's that word? Get those words out there, write them down, let people see what those words are, because that always plays into what the finished product is going to be. And I like to wipe the slate clean. We're not going to come into with some notion of what the schools are. We're going to paint the picture of what we think these schools are, what they should be, in its most inspirational and aspirational way. Along with that, there has to be a sense of, I could throw something out there that you might think is so outlandish it's ridiculous, but I have to be safe to be able to say that. If what I want is this, I need to be able to say that and not think, oh man, people are going to put me down, they're going to laugh at me, they're going to think I'm silly. Has to be a safe, open environment. People can say what they want to say. So along with that, we always get this, people want to find out what neighboring districts have. Ooh man, what's Clearview's vision statement? Let's look at that. And then and invariably you're looking at things, you're going, oh, I like that one. That's a good statement. And you immediately, once you do that, you can't get that out of your head. Now all of a sudden your statement's looking a lot like that one. Or you think, oh, I want it to be that good. I would love it if you never look at another district's vision statement and simply look at your district, think about your district, create your own statement. Create one that's unique to your district, that says what it needs to say for anybody who reads it. So start with a clean slate and don't judge yourself against others. Don't pay attention to them. Then there's always that question about what is vision and what is mission. This is kind of a struggle sometimes when you go through the process. The way I always talk about it, vision is that unattainable, this is what we are at our very best. This says what we are. Mission, on the other hand, is a much more concrete, a doing type statement. There's much more action-oriented words in a vision statement. It's much more about our current state and what we do every day. So the mission statement and the vision statement need to go together. They need to support each other. But a lot of times in that discussion, what you find out is things that people say about a vision statement, you'll look at and hear it and say, that sounds more like a mission. That's not an aspirational statement. That is a doing, this is what we do kind of statement. And so a lot of times those words or ideas that will come up with a vision statement actually end up in the mission statement because they are more action-oriented. And then the other thing that I like, that I've heard said many times, it is aspirational in nature, but it also states your reason for existence. Why are you here? Why do you do what you do every day? That's your mission statement. And so they should very clearly go together and be kind of inseparable. We'll serve our parents, provide leadership, build connections, develop relationships, leverage resources, and enhance learning. I love that. The Ohio Valley mission statement. It's good. How long did it take you to come up with that mission statement?
Took us a long time. Actually, the vision took a lot longer than the mission.
That's not uncommon.
Once we ended up realizing where we were, what we aspired to be about who we were,
Mm-hmm.
then how we're going to get there became easier.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is, so when what we do, that's what we do.
Mm-hmm. Good.
So that's the
Where's your vision statement? I didn't see that
we
one.
don't have that up there. The vision it's similar though, but it's just that we're dedicated to providing innovative services that value and enhance continuous learning.
Okay.
So that's our overarching, who we are. I mean, that's how we're going to know when we get there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Cool.
That's the do and this is the what.
I think those go together very well. And I like what you said about the vision taking longer. Usually it does. We start with the big vision statement first because like you said, the mission statement kind of has to come out of that. you got to figure out where you want to be before you can really make a statement about what you do every day. So I think there's a logical progression or transition from one to the next, but it certainly is not uncommon for that vision statement to take more time to really get right. And it might take a lot of time. And there's also just a word of warning, if you go down the road of strategic planning, one of the things that invariably happens is you will have people in that group that we call taskmasters. They want to put a stake in it. We are done. We have talked about this long enough. But you're also going to have people in the room that need to talk about it. They need to get those ideas out there and really express. And through the give and take, it hones in. But everybody can look at it and they can nod and they can say, yeah, that's right. That's it. And then you move on. So that's a little discussion about vision and mission. They need to go together. Core values. I think core values are a crucial part of the plan. A lot of times when you get together and you start talking about those aspirational words or those ideas that are so important, and everybody wants to put all of those ideas and those words into the vision and the mission. And I always say you really don't want a vision and a mission to be the longest sentences ever created. You don't want them to read like a book. But how do you get the most important ideas in there? Well, a lot of it goes into the core values. But I always also say that the core values are sometimes the most difficult part of the process, putting it together. Getting everybody to agree on the fundamental values that we uphold takes a lot of work. Takes some patience and some discussion. So out of vision, mission, and core values, I have oftentimes found that core values are the most difficult part of that whole thing. And I actually like the second statement about core values. Yes, it is fundamental beliefs of a person or an organization. To help people understand the difference between right and wrong, that's a pretty black and white statement for something that's not black and white at all. There's a lot of gray area in that, especially as you bring more people together to talk about it. But I like this. They help organizations to determine if they are on the right path and fulfilling the goals by creating an unwavering guide. In other words, as we move forward and we do our work, these are the values that guide the way we go about our work. Those are really important. I just recently did some work, and where it ended up from a pretty diverse start was that first of all they said we value education. Or no, that wasn't right. We value children. Because in all the things we're saying, somebody rightfully said, you know what? In nowhere in all of these things we're coming up with do we talk about the kids. What's most important? And that was somebody out of the blue said, we value children. And everybody in the room went, yes. That became the very first statement. So for them, it was very much a hierarchical kind of thing. But bookmarking that was a final statement that said, we value excellence in education. Because in the end, that's why we're here. And I thought it was a beautiful way to begin and end those statements. And so through the process of vetting and time, that kind of clarity comes out of it if you're really focused on what you want that end result to be for the whole group. So, mention big rocks. Once you have a vision and a mission and core values in place, I think it's critically important to look at the big rocks. What are the issues? You got to take time to examine those. And this is an area where you might have a divergence of opinions. Somebody might feel very strongly about something being an issue. Somebody might say, you know what, we can't do anything until we talk about new buildings. And somebody else says, we can't talk about new buildings until we take care of this achievement gap issue that has been over our heads for a long time. You're going to have those kind of back and forths. But through that, creating an exhaustive list of what the most critical issues are in your group allows you to get to that all-important next step. Informed by current reality. Make sure you're not just throwing things out there, but you know where the district is now. Data is important. Perception's important. We like to be able to look at those core values and say, okay, out of this big list, what are the most critical things? And as we look at the most critical things, where are the big buckets? that we fall into. You're kind of taking shape of the umbrella here. And oftentimes they are finance, teaching and learning, curriculum. You know, a lot of districts will feel like, you know what, employee morale or teacher retention's an issue. Sometimes that becomes a priority area. Facilities oftentimes comes up. Technology or innovation, these are all things that oftentimes come out of that big critical issue list. So now, if you could look at those and say, okay, in this case, we can look at the big three here and say everything else we've come up with falls into one of those buckets. Or preferably maybe multiple buckets. We always say that the most strategic things are the ones that go into multiple buckets. If we could do this with facilities, we are going to aid teaching and learning, and we can also have an impact on our finances for the district. So those kind of things we would consider to be very strategic. So those buckets are important. 3 to 5, the magic number, kind of like 3 to 5 years for the strategic plan. You need to have at least 3 in place, big things that encompass no more than 5. When you get past 5, it tends to be less effective. And that's just kind of conventional wisdom about the whole process of creating a plan. So these have to be big. These span over the entire 3 to 5 years of the plan, or maybe longer. They don't go away year to year. So they do have to be big. Here's a goal, because with each one of these, let's say communications is our one of our strategic buckets. I also call them strategic pillars a lot of times. Okay, in communications then, what is the important statement that we want people to know about the work we're doing? Communications is important, we've said that. I just threw this up here because I read this goal. I don't even remember where it came from, but I thought it was pretty cool. We engage in continuous and authentic communication for the benefit of our students, staff, and community. What I love about it is I always like to see goals that are stated in a form that says we've already done this, we've arrived. It's action-oriented, realizing you got a lot of work to get there, but the statement is, this is what we do. And this is important to us. The other thing I always use as a litmus test for those goal statements is, does it evoke next steps? I can't do this, really, or have an impact on this next week, or by the end of the school year even. But I can start imagining steps that need to be taken to be able to actually realize that, and to be able to come back and say, you know what, we really do engage in continuous and authentic communication. And are there things you can put in place to measure that? Well, sure you can, ultimately, as you're going down that road. So that's why I threw that up there as a suggestion or what do I want to say? Example. That word just completely left my mind. Then what are the things, now this is where terminologies might change. I have seen things on strategic plans that say strategic priorities, and that's where that goal statement lives. And then underneath that, you have goals in place. We call those objectives. There's different terminologies for the same thing, but the idea is you got a big statement that says this is what we intend to do, and then you've got the next steps underneath that, breaking it down. What are the things we need to do to get there? And the big thing about objectives or goals or whatever you call those is they have to be SMART. You've probably heard that acronym, right? They have to be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. I think the 2 most important statements in that are measurable and time-bound. I can put the greatest ideas on paper and never take one step to actually making them a reality unless I give myself a timeline. I have a nephew that plays guitar, unbelievable guitarist. I've got a son who plays both electric and upright bass equally well. And we have talked about putting together a coffee shop thing said, that'd be so cool. Let's do that. We've been talking about that for the last at least 5 years. And the last time I saw my nephew, the guitarist, he said the same thing. Man, when are we going to get together and do this? I don't know. Unless we put a deadline on it and says, this is when we're going to do this, we're just going to keep talking about it. And we even laughed and talked about that. And I said, boy, isn't that true? How often do we say, this is cool, we got to do this? And it just never happens. Why? Because you never said, by this date, we're going to do this, doggone it. And we're going to hold ourselves accountable to that. Boards of education have to hold themselves accountable to that time-bound part. If we're going to do this by end of school year 2019, by golly, we're going to do this. And we're going to hold everybody, including us, accountable to getting to that goal. And when we get there, we can say, we did it. It does not happen unless you put the time on it. So I think that is so important. And I could also say, unless they are smart, they have little chance of success. Unless the board does that accountability part, they have little chance of success. Again, I've seen the greatest plans or the greatest ideas never really come to fruition, never really have the impact they could, because the board never really got behind it and supported it and said, this is so important, we have to allocate resources to it, and we have to make sure that it happens. That's the board's role. Then, once you have goals, and you can imagine this is a lot of work that goes into getting to this place. You've got your goals, your priorities. Some districts might have 3, some might have 4 or 5, just depends on where you are and what you think is most important. You created the goal statements, you've got objectives in place, all that is great, but now what? This is the part where the proverbial rubber really hits the road. I think it's the hard part. Creating the strategic plan is that can be invigorating. That can actually be fun, going through that process and getting there and saying, okay, this is good. We got something to work with. Now what? Then you have to really go to work. I think the most impact you can have with a strategic plan is to look at your goals, look at the objectives that you have in place, and then turn it over to the real experts. This is hard for a lot of board members to do. If I'm talking specifically to board members, I have no problem with board members being involved with content areas. Maybe your thing is communication, and you see a real need for that, and you want to be a part of that action planning for the district. Great. But I do not advocate for a board member being in charge of that. Give it to your person in your district that is that content area specialist. If it's teaching and learning or curriculum, give it to your curriculum person. Have them build a team that may or may not involve the people that came up with the strategic plan, but the most intelligent team for the people to really go to work and start digging in. If we're going to do this, we better do these things and make decisions on who's going to do these things. That is where it really starts to take shape. I was involved in a conference call a couple weeks ago where it was just a district asking questions. They have a strategic plan in place. I think it's a very good one. It's very comprehensive. And what they laid out I thought was absolutely beautiful. They had a specific member of the superintendent's administrative cabinet in charge of each of their 4 areas. And that was very intentional. And then each of those people put together, I think they were all somewhere around 14, 15 people involved. They were meeting on an ongoing basis. And the instruction was, you need to work and develop your action plans. Get those on paper. What are the things that you intend to do moving forward? Put the timelines on them. Figure out things like, this is project management. If I'm going to do this, I might have to do these steps first. What steps are dependent on other steps to be completed? Who's going to do these things? How is that going to be rolled out or unpacked, as the word oftentimes is? That's all work you leave up to your district people. But the key is, it's not okay just to say we're doing it. You got to report back. There has to be regular. This is the kind of goes along with the objectives and the time-bound thing. You know what? In February, we're going to hear from the facilities group about where they are in the work that's being done. That is crucial for boards. Your best place is not involved in that actual who's doing the work. Your best place is to understand after this is our end result, who's doing that work, and show us where this work is taking place. That's how you're most accountable. And show us that you're meeting the timelines that were set. That's huge. When a board can get around that and begin to start looking at the end results that are coming from the work that's being done, now you're in a position to really govern in a very, very effective way. Now you're in a position to start making crucial decisions. Comes back, you know what, we need this person on staff to do this job that's laid out in this plan, and it's going to cost X number of dollars. You can look at that then and really evaluate how important that is. Do we need this position? Well, you'll know by the work that's being done by those action teams, and you can make that decision and move forward. It's not on a whim. It's very, very well calculated and laid out. So that, I think, is the most important part of having that strategic plan in place and really working it, having time to discuss and move forward. This is so true. We had an issue with a company I worked for prior to coming to OSBA. I was with this place for 14 years. It started out as a very small consideration that was owned by a much bigger set of manufacturing companies. But we started out with 5 people in the room when we initially started doing strategic planning. It was fun. I mean, we got into it. We spent 2 days really laying out plans and kind of planning the future. It was very invigorating. We came back the next year, we looked at it and said, okay, where are we? What are we doing? And we moved forward. Company grew. Next thing we know, we've got 15 people in the room, but there's 50 people working in the company. Great growth. But one of the things that happened was we would get together and we'd do the analysis. Where's our strengths? Where's our weaknesses? What are our opportunities? Where are our threats? That SWOT thing that we always talk about. And we'd list it all out. We would create goals and objectives. We even had people that, okay, well, so-and-so is going to be the champion of this goal area and all of that. And the next year we'd come back and we'd sit there and go, what did we do? It was never talked about again. So for like 4 or 5 years, we went through this process where we planned this thing and we never heard anything else about it again. And then we came back and said, well, these are all the things we did. And it was like, really? When? How did we do this? And it became a point of dissension for a number of people on the team, to the point where this is silly. Why are we doing this every year? So you have to be very intentional as a board. When you set out to do that strategic planning, this isn't an exercise to make us feel like we did something good for the district and we're doing our jobs. This is very important. This is going to dictate the work that happens in the district moving forward. That's why it needs to take time. That's why it's a big process. That's why the best strategic plans are not even meant to be in the works until 3 years or 5 years, because you're really thinking down the road and you're constantly evaluating, are we doing what we said we were going to do, and the best plan. So by all means, if you go down that road, don't let it collect dust, because you will, for those who are really involved in it and invested in giving time for making it happen, they're going to come back and say, why? Why did we do this? The other thing I will say that I think is really important, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but every 2 years there's an election cycle and we elect new board members. I always get that question, well, what happens if we have a new board? And I always say that the work that you do on that strategic plan, those things that are in place, that reporting out that you're doing, and those action teams that are really working on realizing the plan, is all work to future-proof it. So that if new board members come in, this is our strategic plan. And I think it's vitally important for new board members to see that plan, to have somebody sit down with them, usually the superintendent, and say, this is the plan that we put in place, how you went about doing it, where you have people invested in the things that you've done, where you're going in the future with it. All of that needs to be crystal clear to the new board members coming in, because I think the worst thing in the world that ever happens, and we see it happen, New board members come in and they say, well, we didn't have anything to do with that. It's not our plan. And it ends up being scrapped. So unless you're really working it, and unless it's embedded part of your board culture, you run the risk of it just being disbanded, put aside. And it's very detrimental to the, right, Chris? Not a good thing. So future-proof your work. Work it. And then the other thing I always talk about, staying in the helicopter. Have you heard that before? At some point in your board life, you had to have heard stay in the helicopter. It's that idea of keeping yourself at the 10,000 foot level. And so you can see everything. If I'm on the ground in the middle of my district, I can only see what's right around me. I don't really know what's going on. If I'm up in a helicopter, I can see the whole district. I know exactly what's going on if I'm looking up above. And so by way of analogy, that's what we're talking about here. And a strategic plan helps an entire board stay in their helicopter and keep an eye on the big picture better than anything else out there. If you're really focused on what are we doing now, what do we need to do next, where are we going, how are we allocating, all of those questions keep you in the helicopter. You have no chance to actually get down on the ground where you're much less effective. And it also allows you to keep each other accountable. Much easier to identify where somebody's climbed down the ladder from the helicopter. And you as a board can work on getting them back up there with you. I think that's a big part of it. And that's one of the reasons why a board should embark in a strategic planning process. So it's your tool. Use it for accountability, real accountability. Because the other thing that I always talk about, accountability is not holding somebody's job over their heads. Accountability is not saying, we're going to get this done or else. Accountability is saying, we said we were going to do this. Now, we want to know, are we getting there? Are we making progress? If not, why? What do we need to do? Do we need to reevaluate? You know, you're not putting somebody's head on the chopping block, but you're critically looking at not only what people in the district are doing, but what are you doing as a board? That's an important part of it too, which I think funnels right into evaluations. How does your work relate to the overall work of the district? How do you set up goals for your superintendent and treasurer? If you're going to do a fair evaluation, it has to be based on goals and very clear objectives, right, Chris? How much easier is your job if you have very succinct goals that you're working toward? And here's the part about goals that I'll point to that I think brings clarity to it. Our organization's actually doing this now, and I'm very pleased about this. We have our own strategic plan that we call the Visa. And it's just gone through an overhaul. Throughout this entire last year, it went through a major overhaul. We have some reworked goal areas and a couple of additional ones. But one of the things we're charged with is we come up with our own personal goals that we're going to sit down with the rest of our divisions and people above us and say, okay, this is what I want to do. These are my goals. And they're going to say, this is what we want you to do. We're going to meet in the middle. But those goals need to relate to each one of the strategic areas. We have 5 of them in our plan. So our charge is, as you think about goals, what are specific goals you can do toward each one of those areas? This goal relates to this area. And I think that really helps. When you're working with your superintendent and treasurer, use those goal areas. Use those goal statements. If we're going to do this, how does that relate to one or more of those goal areas? And that's where you can create some very strong goals that are not necessarily just for the next school year. They might span more than one school year. The objectives that fall underneath that are going to be checked off, move up in priority, be replaced by other objectives depending on what happens down the road. But where you can tie it to the strategic plan, you can be very effective. And then on down the line. I'll throw this out there. This is more from the 8 traits of the most effective boards in school districts. Another statement in that research that's been done is the most effective school districts actually have employees all the way down the ladder that can relate the work they do to the strategic plan of that district. It's a pretty tall order, but that's a big thing. When everybody in your district sees how the work they do promotes that plan or works toward that plan, supports it, then you're really clicking. And you really have people rowing in the same direction all the way through the organization. Oh, darn, I'm at the end. So, a lot of thoughts about strategic plans. Does that raise any questions or thoughts? Do you have anything from out in TV land?
Oddly quiet, but hey, you kept them captivated.
Good. I think it's a huge thing. I think it's a huge subject. I also think, in the end, strategic planning gets a bad rap. You will always encounter people in your district and in your own employees that when you say strategic plan, they're going to roll their eyes. And they say, seriously? How much are you paying for this? Who's going to waste time on this? We hear those comments all the time. You have to be able to make it very clear, this is the direction of our district. The work that comes out of this, what we put on paper, that is what we're doing. This is not just for show. We're planning our district's future, and it can be very, very beneficial, and we've seen it do wonders for a lot of districts. So, good. I've talked a lot. Hopefully I've shared some things that you can take back to your boards. You can share. And hopefully you'll get everybody at the table actually talking about working on a strategic plan. That everybody's going to go, yeah, this is a good idea. That's when you can really get some traction and get things rolling. So, okay, great. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
You don't want to attend in person, but you do want to log in either on your phone because you're riding in a vehicle or you're someplace and you want to just log in. We'll send that link out probably a couple weeks beforehand and make sure that you have it. Ohio Valley ESC, I know one of the things, that's one of the services that we provide to a number of our districts is to go in and help them